to decide their fate. No coercion on one side or the other. They get to decide where they think their destiny lies, and their freedoms and liberties will flourish. And that's what we're about here. We're not in favor or against any particular person, party, or otherwise.
Now, let's talk about the referendum itself now. How feasible do you think it is?
Well, it's certainly feasible in the sense that the United Nations has conducted referenda like that before. Of course, the key is how do you operate in a system where you've gotten peace there. Now, what has happened in some cases, the government has delegated government power to this United Nations mission. And what we're trying to seek through some of these subsidiary measures and the international spotlight on the Rajapaksa crimes is pressure on them to delegate to this United Nations mission to operate in the Tamil demarcated areas, which would be largely the north and the east. And that is the way in which this referendum could operate. Now, is it going to be easy? Of course not. We know that Rajapaksas will want to cling to power, but it may well be if they looks like they're facing indictment and you say, we'll drop the indictments, but you have to hold the free and fair referendum. That could be acceptable. And remember, there's this, if you want to call, asymmetry in the dispute between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. The Tamils are not trying to deny the Sinhalese a state, a government, an operating political entity, whereas that can't really be said with regard to what's happening with the government of Sri Lanka, which has declared there's only a military solution. And again, at present, the legal situation of Tamils in Sri Lanka is the situation of a vassal to a lord. There is no legal protection under the Prevention of Terrorism Act or otherwise of a Tamil from whatever a Sinhalese may wish to do. Now, it is true because of that unchecked power, many Tamils, and many of them displaced, 500,000 from the north into Colombo, don't do things that try to upset, the so-called master race. So you say, oh, well, they're all really quite happy here. But, that was said in the United States with slaves. Well, see how happy they are. They don't rebel against their masters, because they know what would happen to them. And that's the situation that sought to be redressed here. And I want to underscore again, this isn't a situation where you've got a group of people, the Tamils, who had small things happen on an aberration, said, oh, we need statehood independently. This is 60 years after long and patient, peaceful efforts through Gandhian-like protests to seek redress of their grievances. The denationalization of 1 million Tamils at the time of Ceylon or Sri Lanka's independence, their disenfranchisement, the ending of Tamil as an official language, the riots of 1958, the ending of the protection against discrimination with eliminating Article 29. Then you had the government-organized race riots of 1983, that all situations ended in no prosecutions, no compensation to the victims, the destruction of the Tamil library in Jaffna. You have the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was open season on Tamils. Every single effort of plea and redress through peaceful means being denied. Well, what alternative is there? And again, the standard is in our own United States Declaration of Independence. You have a right, you have a duty to seek to escape from this vassalage, because this has implications not only for the living, but those yet to be born. If we don't move now to capture freedom, we're then consigning future generations to growing up as basically slaves to a master race. And I know it sounds rather harsh, slavery in this day and age, but that's basically what the situation is. If you have no ability to go to a court of law, to go to police, to protect you from your most fundamental rights, the security in your home. And there's no doubt that the Tamil resolve is there. And I'd like to just describe a story that I heard this morning that is the kind of character that shows that the Tamils, if they stay united, can prevail. This is a 9-year-old girl returning from school, was shot in the neck twice by 2 Sinhalese soldiers. After much maneuvering and obstructionism, she was able to get aircraft to fly her to a special clinic in Portland, Oregon. She had 14 operations. One time she was diagnosed as likely to die within 3 months. That young lady now is 32 years old. She's in Toronto. She's achieved superb education. She can hold the phone and work on a laptop. She's not depressed. She's as resolved and cheerful as you or me. That's the kind of character that we need to appeal to that can overcome what may seem formidable odds. Because this isn't pushing water downhill. No, it's going to take sustained effort and advocacy, in part because in this day and age, if you're a country that doesn't have a lot of oil or nuclear weapons, no one pays much attention to you. And that means that the labor-intensive tasks of educating and pricking the conscience of those elected officials is a far more formidable. It can be done. And another thing that's so important here is we all have to hang together or we hang separately. Division is crippling to our ability to persuade, and one of the major missions that I have as the attorney for Tamils for Justice, again, we're an organization of inclusiveness, is to say we need and we're asking the support of everyone so we can be the de facto voice, spokesperson, and representative of the Tamils in dealing with the international community when they want to look away from the Rajapaksa brothers. Who is an entity, who is an organization we can speak to that can command and can represent the voice of the Tamil diaspora for these ambitions?
Now, I have a question on that part. Now, just to get an understanding of the whole project, Tamils for Justice is based out of U.S., and you are obviously based out of U.S., and how do you propose you taking action in the U.S. is going to bring an awareness to the international community?
Well, we certainly aren't confined to staying within the United States, though obviously I would be up there speaking to members of Congress, the executive branch, the State Department, but we will be traveling to places like Canada, the United Nations, Geneva, London, Australia, to organize and get an excitement behind this particular program. So there's not just one jugular point you say we've won there and then all the cards fall into play. But it's, again, finding these different pressure points, and the arguments are basically the same here. And of course, the idea of the opportunity to vote for an independent Tamil statehood, that benefits everyone. Because we certainly are not going to confine the voting rolls to those who happen to be in the north and the east, or Tamils, because we recognize so many have fled because they've been coerced, intimidated, threatened. That's a little bit like absentee ballot voting, if you will. You know, you don't have to be living in Canada to vote for the Prime Minister in the United States in November of 2008. There'll be many U.S. citizens who are living abroad who will vote. And that's how we would expect that this kind of ultimate vote on a referendum would be organized.
We're getting a lot of calls. I want to ask you a couple other questions before we take some calls. Now, talk to us about the de-proscription of the LTTE. Now, is that something you're trying to do in the United States, or is that something you're trying to do around the world?
Well, listen, the United States is where we're focused on. I'm a U.S. lawyer, and I know what the United States law is. And as described earlier, Congress passes a statute and sets forth the criteria that have to be satisfied to justify a listing. And in the United States, it's required that every 5 years a listing has to be re-examined. And the listing for the Tigers comes up for re-examination in September. So that's soon. And first is looked at by the State Department and decides, and you can make your advocacy felt there, and there's opportunities to seek judicial review of the particular decision of the State Department. Now, one of the things that makes it more problematic in the United States, I don't know what the Canadian rules are, is that the State Department can rely upon classified evidence that doesn't tell you what it is that they think is derogatory about you, when it's like trying to put handcuffs on an eel. It's pretty elusive to try to rebut something that you don't know.
Right.
But that's the situation there in the United States. Obviously, Canadian lawyers would take a look at what the particular standards are here or elsewhere. Although I think it's fair to say that as a practical matter, there are a very large number of countries who routinely follow the United States.
True. Now, for that particular classified information piece, would it be the Sri Lankan government lobbying against lobbying the U.S.